Now, as I've talked about many times before, and even John Boyega himself has expressed his frustration or anger over this, but the character of Finn was not the best handled in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. In fact, many feel like he was downright wasted, that he had the most potential or the most interesting backstory, out of all the new characters at least, and then nothing ever came of any of it. There were even those who thought and or hoped that maybe Finn might end up being the main hero or main protagonist of the whole trilogy, which is the impression some people got after the first trailer for The Force Awakens, where we see him holding a lightsaber and facing off against Kylo Ren, but that obviously ended up being a bit of a decoy or distraction or red herring, and it was Rey who ended up being the hero of the sequel trilogy. And so what I want to do here for fun, don't get all bent out of shape if you're someone who loves the sequels as they are, this again is just for fun, is a short series of videos where changes are made to each of the movies, though I will be keeping most of the structure of the story or the way things go intact, and make it where Finn ends up not only playing a much bigger role in the sequels, but where he ends up the hero of the whole story at the end. And that of course has to start with some changes to him in The Force Awakens, but really we don't have to change too much about him or the story itself. And that's because, yes, the core idea of the character and his general story in the first part of the trilogy is pretty good. In fact, it's The Last Jedi where things go completely off the rails for the character, where he gets sent on a rather pointless side quest because it seems like Rian Johnson didn't really know what to do with him, but we'll get to all that in the next video when we make some pretty big changes to that film, at least for Finn. But again, in The Force Awakens, much more subtle changes will work just fine and set up a terrific character arc for Finn overall. And the very first thing we have to do is tone down his rather overt humor. And honestly, I've never understood why he was like that in the first place. Why someone who had spent his whole life as basically a brainwashed soldier was always kind of cracking jokes and saying things that didn't seem to fit not only the character, but in Star Wars itself. Like when he's asking Rey if she has a cute boyfriend. And look, I think Finn can certainly still be the source of plenty of humor, but have it be more fish out of water type humor, where again, he spent his entire life in the very rigid and disciplined First Order system, and so he has a tendency to take everything literally since they don't joke around in the First Order. This way you could, at first, have Finn be almost like Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy, where things are always going over his head because he can't pick up on sarcasm or metaphors. In other words, let's show what the First Order has done to him. Let's show how it greatly affected the person he's become. Let's have overcoming that training be a part of his story and growth. Because, to me, he never gives off the feel of a former stormtrooper in the movies. As I've said before, when he sheds his stormtrooper armor in the deserts of Jakku, it's like he also sheds the impact it all had on him. Other than just being afraid of the First Order, there's no real impact or lasting scar from being a part of them, and that's something I'm very much going to change. And going along with this change, the next thing that would be different before he even gets to Jakku to take off the armor is the escape he makes with Poe. Again, we're toning Finn's humor down, so a lot of it or the dialogue would need to be different, which could be a problem because there was great chemistry formed between these two characters in that escape, and we really don't want to ruin that. But I think we can make it equally funny by, again, going the very literal or direct route with Finn and what he's saying to Poe, and how Poe jokingly deals with him back. And Poe can still, of course, give him the name Finn. I think that's a very important moment. The other thing then that I changed with the escape when they're in the TIE Fighter is making Finn very hesitant about firing on his former comrades. After all, having one of them die in his arms is what basically started all this in the first place, so let's not so quickly throw that idea away. The idea that he would care about the stormtroopers since he's still basically one of them at this point and knows that they're all in the same boat as him, that they're all brainwashed from birth. So what you could do here is, instead of him opening fire seemingly without hesitation or thought, is have him hesitate, and or he doesn't fire directly on them, but instead maybe blows up some fuel canisters or something, so that he doesn't actually have to shoot them, he just causes a distracting explosion so they can get away. Or if you really want, that part can be removed altogether, and instead of the fuel line still being attached, they just get in the TIE Fighter and fly away. However, I would keep it and just add the hesitation and maybe a moment of reflection or regret later on when he's taking off the armor in the desert. Moving on then, I wouldn't change too much with the interactions between Finn and Rey in the next part of the movie, again other than toning down Finn's humor and making them maybe just a little more leery of each other. Not too much though. I do like the idea that these two kind of latch on to each other in a very difficult situation. Two people that under normal circumstances probably wouldn't trust each other, considering the type of lives that they've led before this. And to kind of skip ahead for a moment, I'd absolutely ditch the idea of Finn being any type of janitor. Though to be clear, it's said, I believe in the visual dictionary for episode 7, that all stormtroopers had other duties that they had to perform, and that was just Finn's. It's not that he was a janitor first who could also fight. That wouldn't make any sense as to why his unit would personally accompany Kylo Ren on missions. But what would make sense is if Finn was instead part of an elite firearms unit or something like that, something akin to Vader's Fist or the 501st, another way Kylo wanted to be like his grandfather, which would mean Finn's a very highly skilled or trained marksman, one of the best the First Order has to offer, which is again why his unit was assigned to Kylo Ren. This would then change the scene at Maz Kanata's castle, where Finn comes clean and tells Rey he's an ex-stormtrooper. It's here that he would very briefly talk about how he was in an elite squad trained to take out enemy targets before they could take him out, but that he wasn't trained to slaughter unarmed civilians. And that when he was asked to do that, he knew he had to get away, far away from the First Order, because they do not and cannot stand or tolerate deserters, not that many ever do, and so he wants to get away from her for her own protection, not necessarily because he's afraid, though yeah, he certainly still is to an extent. The next change here then would be during the First Order's attack on Maz Kanata's castle, and when she gives Finn the lightsaber to use, Finn will basically tell her he has minimal training with melee type weapons, that he's really only ever been trained to shoot, that it's his life. This will get highlighted when he encounters Captain Phasma during the fight, not a random stormtrooper this time, and she easily bests him in melee combat, but just before she kills him, he's saved at the last moment by a random shot from somewhere that incapacitates Phasma. Next up then, Finn will of course still want to go to rescue Rey from Starkiller Base, and ends up going with Han and Chewie as usual. Once there or during the rescue, we need to go out of our way to show just how good of a shot Finn really is. And so, after briefly grappling with himself about firing on his former comrades yet again, Finn ultimately does shoot on them, but instead of shooting to kill, we see him shooting them in the legs or the arms, just enough to stop them without actually killing them. After noticing what Finn's doing, Han then makes a comment about how he either has the best aim he's ever seen or the worst, something about how he can tell he's a former stormtrooper. Finn then says he doesn't want to kill them if he doesn't have to, that he used to be one of them not so long ago. Han then reminds him that they're here to blow up the whole base, and a lot of stormtroopers are going to die along with it, which is when it truly dawns on Finn what they're doing here, and he looks suddenly reluctant. Han then reminds him of the Hosnian system being destroyed and that the Resistance is next if they don't act. He then again asks Finn how they can take down the shield, that it's what has to be done, and Finn thinks for a moment and finally says he has an idea. That's when we see Captain Phasma again get ambushed and captured by our heroes. But after she refuses to help them, that she'd rather die than betray the First Order like he did, Finn knocks her out with the butt of his rifle and tries to drag her over to a nearby panel or console, with no success. Finally, Chewie helps them and together, they take off her glove and place her bare hand on some sort of scanner, which unlocks the system, and Finn then lowers the shields to the base. They all then turn to go, but Finn stops, runs back to the panel, and hits another button, and an alarm goes off. He then says it's an evacuation alarm, to which Han says nothing, he only gives him a look of understanding. Everything then sort of transpires as normal from here on out, at least for Finn, with the only real difference I'd add to the brief battle in the snow between him and Kylo Ren is that after picking up the lightsaber, Finn would look at the weapon and give it a look as if he knows he's got no chance with this thing, especially against Kylo, but he fights anyway and still ends up with his back being split open. The real big change I'd make to the end of The Force Awakens, which will affect Finn down the road as we'll eventually see, is how the fight between Rey and Kylo Ren plays out. Though I'd certainly keep it where Rey looks like she can to some degree hold her own, that she has been in fights, I'd have it where Kylo is trying to break her down, where he keeps asking her to join him, and that he wants the map to Skywalker. And when Rey seems ready to break to some extent, Luke Skywalker shows up and even says something cheesy like, "You don't need a map to find me, and she'll never join you." A very brief fight then ensues between Luke and Kylo, where Luke is either told or senses that Kylo Ren has killed his father, that he has killed Han Solo, which makes Luke have to grapple with all that on the spot, and he ultimately decides to let Kylo escape because he doesn't want to give in to his anger and potentially kill him. After the fight then, Luke tells Rey that the Force has guided him to her. When Rey asks Luke why, he tells her that they must figure that out together. The two then go off, Rey a bit reluctantly. She doesn't want to leave the injured Finn, while Chewie takes him back to the Resistance base. And that's basically where this movie would end. Okay, and before wrapping up this first part of the series, let me briefly explain one big change I'm going to make to The Last Jedi, which is that Finn will not just wake up and be all fine and dandy in that movie, as if nothing has ever happened to him, or his back or spine, in this one. Because doing nothing with that, with the main antagonist maiming and almost killing one of our heroes, or in this case, our new main hero, is such a waste. So instead of Finn waking up in The Last Jedi and immediately being turned into the butt of a joke by hitting his head on the glass tube he's in, and then leaking Bacta all over the floor, not to mention again being 100% fine as if nothing happened to him like 2 days ago, he's going to wake up with a cybernetic spine, and will have a very hard time even moving around at first, much less holding his hand steady and being the expert marksman he once was. In other words, the goal of the next movie will be to see how he deals with the only identity he's ever known or had, that being a soldier, being taken away from him, not just learning about animal cruelty and capitalism. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about the changes I made to The Force Awakens and what you think about Finn's story so far. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.